Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Farm Finance. My name is Sarah Hetke. I am a digital communications consultant here at Compeer Financial and going to be your host for our conversation this evening. Let's Talk Farm Finance is a video series that we designed to help farmers and agribusiness owners and rural residents better understand and dig into the details of the financial side of their business. Or in tonight's conversation, our home, our hobby farm, our rural property. Today we're going to be talking with Mary Grace Carlson. Mary Grace is on our Rural Living Solutions team. She's going to help us better understand the ins and the outs of purchasing a rural property. So Mary Grace, welcome. And let's start off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role here at Compeer.
Thank you, Sarah. I grew up on a grain and livestock farm in southeastern Illinois, and I've lived in western Illinois with my husband for nearly 10 years. We have twin 5-year-old boys, and we live on probably what's considered a hobby farm where we dabble in cattle and both have town jobs too. So I've been with Compeer for 1.5 years, and I've been in the banking and lending industry for about 8 years.
Great. Well, I can see why we got connected for our conversation. You really are living the hobby farm lifestyle, but you have a good understanding of agriculture and rural communities. So Mary Grace, I know during the pandemic, we saw a really big push for folks who wanted to get outside of those large population centers where there was a really strong demand for rural properties. Are we still seeing that today?
Sure, we absolutely are. I think if you look back, this demand from the urban areas has kind of filtered with people's needs as they grow and they change within their family needs as well. But definitely within the pandemic, we saw a strong drive like we hadn't before, this desire to escape the confines of the city as people found themselves stuck in their quarters during the pandemic. And this has really caused a stress on the real estate market, especially close to metropolitan areas where people are still actually sprawling, if you will, to get a property outside of city limits and kind of to purchase some of their own space and some of their own freedoms. During the pandemic, people stayed home, and I think that also served as a loud awakening for how small their living spaces and the area and distance from others was, as well as the limitations to their properties. So this has also added fuel to the fire with the demand and rapid sales of rural properties. Aside from metropolitan areas, I think in rural communities, we're seeing a lot as people had the same experiences, but this is stimulating movement within those marketplaces as well. A simple Realtor.com or Zillow search is showing slim pickings for the properties that are actually available on the market. And I keep track of those sites pretty regularly, and the houses that do go on the market don't stay there long. They're pretty quick sales. So, yeah.
Yeah, I keep hearing that from folks who are trying to buy properties, homes. They're just moving so quickly. We highlighted some of those differences between, the urban living situation and maybe feeling a little cramped, wanting some more space out in the countryside. But what are really some of those considerations that folks should be making when it comes to those differences when they're purchasing a rural property?
Sure. Well, of course, I'm a lender, so let's talk about financing first. I think Compeer Financial should be your first option because rural properties is what we specialize in, and we're a portfolio lender, which means not every property has to fit within specific specs, if you will. We've got in-house underwriters that kind of take each property under consideration, and since our goal is to better rural America, we're a little more in step with what those needs would be. So the next thing that that I think that you should think about. Maybe some of the basic things, which would be like zoning. So, um, depending on what your goals are, you might want to consider that not every community of 2,500 or less is going to allow chickens in your backyard or a milk goat. And then there's the obvious commute situation. Depending on where you're moving from, there's the difference in distance from city hubs, drives to things like the doctor, your job, the grocery store, or in my situation, even just the 15-minute one way to pick up a pizza, whereas you might be accustomed to a 5-minute round trip or even one being delivered at your doorstep. Now, having said that, for me, I think the positives far and outweigh the negatives. My husband and I wanted our kids to grow up similar to us. We were both farm kids, and we wanted a world outside our back door that would involve like pastures and access to creeks and everything that nature has to provide. And of course, like gardening is something big that you kind of want to share with your kids so they can at least see how food grows. I know in the summer, our family just about lives on squash and cucumbers. And if you know anything about gardening, that says a lot about me. I'm not a very good green thumb, but it's the experience. So.
Absolutely. You know, there certainly are differences in living in the country, and not some that take some getting used to, and some that are kind of joys, right? The extra room that you have to spread out, and the creative things that you can do with that extra space, especially, you know, for those with kids or who want livestock, pets, maybe a combination of all of the above. So really fun to think about what that rural property could look like moving forward. But as you mentioned, you are a lender, and something that I recently learned is that there are some differences in financing options for rural properties versus when we look at something, you know, in the city limits or in a larger population center. So can you help us understand what some of those different options are?
Sure. And there's differences even within Compeer as far as financing rural properties. So you would first need to start and think about the purpose of the property, the type of property, are there sheds on the property, and how many acres. Is it 3 acres, 30 acres, 300? And that can kind of determine what the differences and opportunities for financing are. Here at Compeer, we have 2 different options that can offer you long-term fixed rate. Those 2 options are secondary market, which here we sell our loans to Freddie Mac, a well-known government-supported secondary market lender, and they're very well known for low interest rates and also for low down payment. But the property itself needs to fit within a certain box. Not every property is going to qualify. And so the second option that we have for our clients is a portfolio in-house loan. And with a portfolio in-house loan, these are the loans that we underwrite in-house and that we have the liberty and the discretion to get the house in 10 acres. We can do the log cabin, we can do the berm home. The barn dominiums are really hot right now, and that's not a problem for us either. So in doing that, we have the opportunity to go long-term fixed rate, where at some banks, you don't have that access outside the box. A lot of banks use the secondary market option, but don't have long-term fixed financing beyond that. So in those cases, the clients are going to be dealing with an adjustable rate mortgage or even a balloon note, which in both cases, the interest rate itself is subject to change. And in the case of a balloon, you're actually looking at not just a change, but having to refinance the whole loan at some point and potentially incurring all of those refinance fees.
Definitely good to know that that is the situation that you might encounter before you get too far into the process, and making sure that you're really working with a lender who can help you with the ins and the outs, because there are some intricacies with the rural properties. for those who are watching, just want to make sure to mention that Mary Grace will take some questions. She's our expert, so while she's here, feel free to ask those questions while we're live. Also, anyone who's watching through the recording, we will be monitoring the comments afterwards too, so feel free to drop your questions in the comments. We'll keep an eye out for those. But Mary Grace, let's continue our conversation. And we've talked about the excitement of buying a rural property. We talked about the kind of complicated intricacies when it comes to financing, but that's why we work with an expert. So let's talk about something to really get us excited and get us, kicking the can down the road. So for anyone who's ready to purchase a home, a rural home, how do they start that conversation with their lender?
Well, the very first thing that you need to talk to your lender about is where you're at in the process. Is this your first home? Are you a veteran home buyer? Are you just trying to do your homework, get your feet wet, find out what you need to do? And then the next thing is, do you have a property in mind? And if so, describe the property to your lender, be specific. How many acres are there? Are there sheds? Are there income earning potentials on the property? Make sure that your lender knows and understands really what you're looking for so that they understand whether or not they can fully help you. The next thing that you need to communicate with your lender is how much money you're comfortable using as a down payment. This will save you and them a lot of time and energy if everybody is on the same page and you can get together with exactly what you can afford. Then beyond that, know that we have regulations. So your lender is going to ask you for a lot of documentation, and it's going to seem really tedious and cumbersome, and you're going to think that we're all trying to be nosy and pesty. But the fact of the matter is that whether it's Compeer or your local lender, we're all tied to regulations and need to stay in compliance. And in order to stay in compliance, we have to prove your identity and your financial status and show that you can actually afford to buy the property that you're wanting to buy. And so the documentation that you would need when you come to your lender would be 2 years of tax returns, last 2 pay stubs, W-2s, bank statements, driver's licenses, and some institutions do require a few other things depending on your complete situation, but that'll get you started.
Yeah, there's a lot of details that go into the process, right? But that's why it's so important to connect with your lender and to really work with them and be a partner with them to go through the process. So appreciate you laying that out for us. I have not purchased my first home, so I know it's really interesting for me to hear all of that, and it sounds a little overwhelming, but also great to know that there's folks like you out there who deal with this every day and know it like the back of your hand. We did have a couple questions come in, so we're going to take some of those. Danielle asked, do you work with VA loans?
I do have the capability to work with VA loans. It's through a third party, so it wouldn't be our Freddie Mac or our in-house portfolio option, but I do have a third party that I can move a VA loan through.
All right, next question comes from Amy. She is wondering if the financing process for unique properties is different than a traditional mortgage, or does it look similar?
The financing process itself, it looks pretty much identical, whether it's a house on 1 acre or if it's a unique property, meaning that it's an A-frame, a berm home, a barn dominium. Basically, what we're looking for is there value in the property? Is the property in good condition? And if there is value, do we have adequate comps, comparables for that property? And something unique is that the more barn dominiums and shed homes that are being built, seems to be that that's the most atypical property. The more we're using regular stick-built houses as the comparisons for those. The same goes with houses and acreage. So if you're looking at a house in 12 acres, we're going to try to find other homes within, the 10 to 30 acre range to be a satisfactory comparable.
Very cool. Well, Mary Grace, I think we're coming to the end of our time together, but I want to wrap up with a fun question. So what is your favorite part of living in the country with your family?
I am a huge cattle person, and I actually don't spend as much time as I should with my cows, but my very favorite thing is just to walk the pasture and to take my kids out in the pasture, whether there's cows out there or not, just the green grass, the rolling hills. That's my absolute favorite thing, and if I can get some chirping in the background, it really makes my day. So.
Wonderful. Well, you sold me on it. I'll be looking for a rural property in the near future. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your expertise. And thank you all for watching. If you are happen to watch this as a recording, don't forget to drop your questions in the comments because we will keep monitoring that. Have a great night.
Thanks.